Yes. Ross Dellenger, Yahoo Sports, who has been all over the college football playoff, the revenue, the format, and much more, and everything else college sports, too. Ross, thanks for your time. So I reached out to Rhett Daniels of the college football playoff, the media relations, and I said, so what is the actual deadline? He's telling me there's not really a deadline, but sooner rather than later. So is this going to be like a union strike in the company and you need an actual deadline, or is it always going to be just kicked down the road?
Well, they have, I think they have set kind of, as I wrote on in Friday's story, kind of an internal deadline, whether that's because of ESPN or not. I don't really know. I do know that ESPN made it fairly clear to the CFP that they'd like a decision and on an extension and an acceptance of their offer that has been on the table for, I think, more than a month now. So they'd like some kind of deal done, and so they have set an internal deadline. The CFP has for the end of the week. This week, there's supposed to be a couple of calls at the end of the week, and I think the hope was that they would have a resolution. But lots of deadlines over the last 3 years. Lots of deadlines have been set, and the CFP has blown right through them. So I wouldn't be hopeful.
Ross, I keep reading this term that is in a lot of your columns, socializing, that they kind of float out terms like the automatic buys for the SEC and Big Ten, no matter what. That one kind of went over like Wendy's charging more for Baconators at 6 p.m. than they will at 3 p.m. Is that kind of the methodology they're doing to get a PR buzz on what things could be? And if there's any backlash, like float out the idea and see if it sticks, because I would have thought you would needed to socialize that buys thing at all to know that most people wouldn't be in favor of it.
Yeah, well, this is what happens with kind of the process. Usually, is you have weeks of days, if not weeks or months of meetings, the CFP commissioners, and then they often kind of filter out and meet with their athletic directors and or executive councils, which usually is an athletic director and a couple presidents, and they pitch the plan. And that's kind of like, and they get feedback. And that's kind of what happened last week. I think it was going on this week as well. I think that, I think that these are all negotiating terms and ploys. You've got Big Ten and SEC on one side, and you've got Big 12, ACC kind of on another. And the group of us probably kind of caught in the middle in a lot of ways. Just some of them just happy to kind of be there and have access. And so it's really, this is a deal among the Power Four. And I think what happens is SEC Big Ten floats something out like the original proposal of four AQs for each of them, right, which was shot down, and then the guaranteed buy, which was shot down and pretty roundly, criticized in the public sphere as well. And now that's kind of, as we wrote on Friday, that's kind of been tabled a little bit. In general, the format has been tabled. This discussion is about revenue and money and the revenue share and how you distribute money. And that's what they need to get done first. They got to get that agreement done, and then they would move on to getting the ESPN deal done. And then I think the last thing here is the format. Actually, that could come weeks from now. They could agree on a format eventually. And in whatever format they agree on, it could change through conference realignment as well. So it could eventually change. But all the focus right now, I think, is on this revenue distribution model. It is being socialized. It'll be socialized more this week at conference basketball tournaments. A lot of times commissioners at these tournaments meet with their ADs. I believe they're in the Big 12. They'll have a meeting, I believe, on Tuesday and Wednesday with athletic directors and Commissioner Brett Yormark.
Ross, how much have some of these talks been complicated, if at all, by the uncertainty in the ACC?
Well, that is certainly something to consider. I think that I wrote in that story on Friday about the revenue distribution, the impact that this specific revenue distribution model could have on realignment and on specifically the ACC. And I think there's some concern that there will be some continuous shuffling in that conference and movement in general across the national landscape. And it's probably why, at least right now in the proposal that's being circulated, you've got a look-in provision. If there is some realignment that happens, you'll have a look-in to the contract where things can be changed. Revenue sharing model in the format could be changed. So I'm sure that's in there, largely because of the instability in the ACC.
Ross, in the NFL, which is the most powerful league in the world, other than perhaps the European, what they have in soccer, even though the Cowboys are more valuable than anybody else, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, or whoever, they have equal revenue sharing. So when the NFL contract is split up among 32 teams, Cincinnati gets the same amount as Dallas. Dallas can make more money on the side because they're the Cowboys of their logo and brand. College football getting away from even understanding if the most powerful league can do that, why can't they?
Well, I think that that is dying in college athletics. We've seen, and on a lot of levels, we've seen for years now, the NCAA, and when I say the NCAA, I mean the entire membership of the schools that have representatives on these committees that make the rules. They have for years tried to legislate competitive equity, and that's beginning to break. We've seen that kind of break under the weight of increasing revenues at the highest level. I think there are programs that make a lot of money, whether it's the top 30 or top 50 or even top 70, and they make a lot of money. They make enough money to be able to spend that money in ways they want, and they want to keep the money that they make or the value that they bring. And that's what we're seeing. We've seen that on the national level at the NCAA, how they've deregulated a lot of rules to the conferences and such, and they've stopped. In a lot of ways, they've stopped regulating competitive equity. And now we're starting to see it at the conference level. And now what we're talking about here, we're starting to see it at the CFP level, where you have the uneven distribution of revenue and the unequal format when it comes to access for playoffs as well. You could certainly argue that those things are not good for the industry as a whole, but I think members in the SEC and members in the Big Ten would argue that they spend more, they make more, and so they want more. And that's kind of the argument. And again, I think that there is a very good argument to be made that is not in the best interest of everyone. But there's a lot of thinking about me right now in, I guess, America in general, but certainly it's filtered down into college athletics.
Ross, they are when you try to make rules with automatic qualifiers for any league, you do limit the number of total teams you can get because now you've got to fill all these other ones out. Also, wouldn't you just be like, if you're doing all the automatic qualifiers, aren't you like guarding against a future that may be kind of like a one-off every few years where the SEC may only have 3 teams that get in, or the Big Ten may only have 2 teams that get in? It would just be one kind of really weird bad year, and then it would go back to where you're probably getting 4 each year anyway. Like I don't understand why they want to guard against that, other than just to make sure they keep that money when they could maybe make more of it by not having automatic qualifiers.
Well, I think one of the things why you see the multiple automatic qualifiers circulating out there in these models is to remove, I know from the Big Ten side, they feel this way, it's to remove as much as they can the authority and subjectivity of a selection committee. So they want it to be more like, pro sports in the NFL, where you have a certain amount from a division in the NFL's case, or a conference in college case, of teams make it in the top of the standings. So I think number one, it would eliminate some of the subjectivity with the selection committee. Number two, I think that they want their regular season, both SEC and Big Ten, to be as valuable as possible. They want to play big games. I think a lot of them want to get away from playing the G5 non-conference game or FCS non-conference game, actually. I think they are moving away from that. And in order to do that, you have to play bigger games, and you're risking losses. And so you want, a certain amount of your standings, your top of your standings to get in automatically, and not have to, worry about thinking about scheduling 2 or 3 bye games to get those victories. So that's another part of this. And then there's certainly plenty of ways to have a playoff format in college. And, one of them we have right now, which is the selection committee pretty much does it all. And, or you have a certain number of automatic qualifiers. But back to the revenue for a second, there's a ton of ways you could do the revenue differently. And I'm not exactly sure why they haven't chose to do the revenue distribution more on performance based than automatic, like they're doing now. In a way, they're doing automatic qualifiers for the revenue. 58% of the revenue going to the SEC and Big Ten, and 32% basically going to the Big 12 and ACC is a fairly huge gap. And I know they obtained that gap, or they obtained those numbers. They used the previous 10 years of CFP participation by conference when you consider the realignment moves. And this is what they came up with. I think 72% of the field the last 10 years was made up of Big Ten and SEC. So they kind of used that to determine these base distributions for the CFP. But to me, right, the more there's another way to do this, and that is to do it based on performance. If you get a team in, then you get a certain amount. And they do that now, but it only is responsible for a very small amount of the distribution. $100 million of the $1.3 billion is performance based. And I don't know. I kind of feel like that should be more, and a lot of people would agree.
Ross, where do you think the health stands right now in terms of conference championship games, given the expanded format and just kind of the desires of various leagues?
Yeah, I think it depends on the exact format, right? If you I think there are 3 formats kind of floating around right now. We reported on that one about a week and a half ago, where you have 3 automatic qualifiers for each the Big Ten and SEC, 2 for the Big 12 and ACC, 1 for the G5, and then you have 3 at large. So there's that one. And then there's one, I think that's 2-2, 1-1, 1 G5, and then 7 at large. And then there's a 5 plus 9, which is kind of like the 5 plus 7 we have. We have 5 automatic qualifiers of the 5 highest ranked conference champions, and then you have 9 at larges. It depends. If the format is the latter, where it's 5 highest ranked conference champions get AQs and 7 at large, well, conference championship games mean a ton, right? You get the AQ if you win. If it's the first one I mentioned, the 3-3-2-2, then conference championship games, I can almost assure you, will not exist in their current form if that's the model, because they are somewhat irrelevant to the whole thing. If it's the 2-2-1-1, in the ACC and the Big 12, your conference champion would get the AQ, so it still does mean something. There's no doubt that conference championship games in the future of them in college football, even if it's a 5-9 or 5-7 as it is for the next 2 years, probably will be reevaluated in a lot of leagues. Now, the SEC and Big Ten make a lot of money on their conference championship games. And I would guess they would work hard to keep them, or keep a version of them even if it's like the third or fourth team playing for a spot or something like that. But, I wrote a story back in December actually analyzing this issue because I heard some buzz that there are conferences that or at least believe that they should examine whether they should have a championship game or not. So if we have a 5-9, 5-7, probably more likely they stay around a little longer. In anything else, any other version, the 3-3, 2-2, the 2-2, 1-1, I think you'll have a real hard time keeping conference championship games for very much longer.
Ross, there's a quote in your article, would the Power 2 really leave if we say no? Is there a number that you have heard, a percentage right now? It's 31 point whatever percent for the Big 12 ACC. Is there a number that they would put up there and say, this is what we want? And I know this negotiation. But is there a number where they would say, screw you, you guys do your thing, we need to figure out our own future, we're going to move on? And then where would their money come from? Would that be part of the $1.3 billion because everything changes?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything, if there's some kind of split, right, everything changes. And it's hard for me to see that happening and the Big Ten and SEC going off and, having their own playoff. And maybe, I don't know, there could be some other leagues in the G5 that even opt in to their playoff. But if the Big 12 and ACC are going to hold out, man, that really complicates things. You only have 34 schools in the Big Ten SEC. And that is just a really small group. And you got to think about your TV partner in ESPN, potentially Fox at some point. You've expanded the playoff now, 12, 14 teams. So would a 14, let's say a 14 team playoff that incorporates all of FBS, in this version, everybody stays together, will be worth $1.3 billion. What would a 18, let's say 6 or 18 playoff in a 34 team Big Ten and SEC combo thing? What would that generate? Probably not 1.3 billion, but probably pretty close. I'm guessing it would be close, and they know it would be close to that number. But I don't know that ESPN, who has a stake in the Big 12, it has a stake in several Group of Five conferences, and certainly has a stake in the ACC. They've got sole rights there. Would want a split to happen? I just don't. I don't buy it. I think that they would push back ESPN so much on that, I would imagine.
Well, Ross, one more thing. When the Big Ten and the SEC are already making, and their new TV deals that whenever they start will be making, I don't know, what is it, between 25 and 40 or so $1 million a year more per school. Then on top of that, they're going to make it extra 10 or 15 million over the ACC in the Big 12 per school if this 58, 31, whatever. How much do they need? I know it's America, right? It's get what you can, and if you have the ability to do it, but how much more before they separate so far that there really is no competition?
Well, we're getting to the point to where the gap is so wide that maybe the competition on the field will not continue between everybody. It does feel like we're getting close to that point. And when I mean close, I mean within, the next iteration. Maybe it's not here yet, but, we're talking about a 6-year deal and extension with ESPN that would run through 2031. Well, beyond that, the next iteration, and I wrote about this a few weeks ago. Let's just take the G5. The gap between the G5 and the P4 is growing steadily, and NIL has been a big contributor to that. And with the CFP revenue distribution figures, the gap will continue to grow between those two groups. And you wonder how long they can compete together, let alone, the two Big 12 and ACC staying competitive with the SEC and Big 10. I think the next iteration, there's a lot of people in the G5 that believe that they should do their own thing. because the competition is getting where it's so harder to compete. You know, the G5 has been somewhat weakened with realignment. A lot of their top teams are gone. You know, the Cincinnati's, UCF's, Houston's, off to the Big 12. And so you do wonder about that gap. And then you look at the other gap, like we've been talking about, between the P2 and the other two. And you wonder how long that can continue, especially when, as you said, you'll have that growing revenue gap. And it's why teams like Florida State, right, and maybe Clemson, North Carolina, have examined getting out of the ACC, thinking that that's long term, 10 plus years down the road, that's not the place. They're not going to be playing the same game. And I think when you look at the revenues, which you talked about, the media rights deal, which I believe at the end of all the contracts or so, 7 to 8 years from now, I believe the numbers are, ACC would be making around low 50s each ACC school. Big 12 is more in the, I think, high 40s, maybe around the same, around 50, either one of them. And the Big 10 and SEC and media deals will make it in the mid to high 90s, I think is the latest projection. Then you add, as you mentioned, right, the CFP figures. Each SEC school in this proposal will get $23 million a year. That is roughly $10 million more than what the Big 12 schools will get. And imagine that over time. It certainly wears down and comes a point where you say, throw up your hands, right, and say, well, there's no more competition here.
Ross, this is a total what if, and who really knows, but as best, I guess, as you can guesstimate, had the Pac-12 been able to finagle a TV deal a bit earlier, or everybody would have, guess, just been a lot more patient, or a little bit more patient. They were a lot patient, but a little bit more patient. Is this conversation still basically happening as is, or would that have put a roadblock, you think, that prevents this conversation? Was this all inevitable to begin with, or was that like the final straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak?
Well, you can point to a lot of things, right? You can point to me, there were 3 big waves of realignment that resulted in our current situation. And that is Oklahoma and Texas obviously leaving for the SEC, USC and UCLA leaving for the Big 10. And then, of course, this past August with the implosion of the Pac-12. If the Pac-12 were still in existence without USC and UCLA, I think a similar conversation to now would be happening still. It wouldn't probably be as extreme. I don't think if you had a 5th power league that the SEC and Big Ten would combine for 58% of the base revenue, under the current proposal. But maybe it's 50% or 48% or something like that. It would still be high, but I do think you would still have a similar conversation. The gaps, would be smaller between the conferences and among the schools. The gaps would be a little smaller probably, but in the end, I don't know how long. As soon as USC and UCLA left the Pac-12, it was kind of the end because that league, even if they got a new deal, it would have been a short deal. Eventually, what we're seeing happen with the consolidation of the most valuable and big brands is or was going to happen. Like this was going to happen eventually. I think it's undone. Obviously, you have the ACC. That's breaking apart in a way, or might break apart in a way, just like the Pac-12 as well.
Ross, as always, man, love watching whenever you pop something up on the Twitter feed or what you have on Yahoo Sports online. Appreciate the time you give us. Great job, and we'll see what that deadline might be, and hopefully there is some kind of at least something new to grab onto and move forward by the end of the week. Ross Dellenger, Yahoo Sports, with us on 365 Sports.
Yeah, I think